Thank you for joining Richard and myself for this part of the celebration of CT at 50. As we celebrate the 50th anniversary of the first clinical CT scan carried out on the 1st of October 1971, it is very appropriate that we recognise and learn more about the inventor of the CT scanner, Sir Godfrey Hounsfield. We can trace Godfrey's family back to the area south of Sheffield in England, where the family and the family name of Hounsfield have their origins. In Dronfield, some 6 miles south of Sheffield, is the Manor of Hounsfield. The original old moated house Hounsfield Hall, which became known as Hounsfield, still existed there in 1943, as the picture on the top right shows. The picture below from Google Maps a little while ago shows that the original old moated house is now a pub or a hotel. There are many old roads and references in the general area around Sheffield with the name Hounsfield, spelt in one of a number of different variations. We can trace Godfrey back to the village of Brimington, some 9 miles south of Sheffield. It was in Brimington in the early 1600s that Bartholomew Hounsfield was born, and it is through Bartholomew's great-great-grandson Thomas and his son James that we can trace Godfrey's heritage. In 1653, Bartholomew Hounsfield married Elizabeth Haslam from the village of Newbold, just south of Dronfield, and Newbold became a common name in the Hounsfield family and was Godfrey's middle name. In 1919, Godfrey's father Thomas became a farmer in Sutton-on-Trent, about 30 miles southeast of Sheffield. That was the year that Godfrey was born. Thomas found it very difficult to make a living out of the 50-acre farm sufficient to support his family with 5 children. I believe that being brought up on a farm with very little money set a framework for Godfrey throughout his life. In the photo you can see Godfrey as a baby sitting on his mother's lap, with 3 out of his 4 siblings. His eldest sister Molly is missing from the photo. From the age of 9, Godfrey attended Magnus Grammar School in Newark, which was just south of the farm in Sutton-on-Trent. He did not excel at school, although he did show some interest in subjects which interested him, such as physics and maths. Godfrey was certainly not an academic. His lack of success at school is confirmed in his school report at the age of 16, which states, "Godfrey's bad work was due to intellectual retardation." In fact, Godfrey didn't even get his matriculation, which was the examination for 16-year-olds in those days. But from a very young age, he was curious about how things worked and was instinctively skilled at repairing them. His mother told the story of a grandfather clock which hadn't worked for years and which Godfrey took to part at the age of about 5, rebuilt it, and it worked. He showed an interest in all sorts of experimentation from a very early age. As a teenager, he flew in homemade gliders. He climbed up unsupported ladders. Godfrey never did things by half, and he certainly loved to experiment. Details about a couple of Godfrey's rocket experiments were only discovered a few years ago, as Richard now recalls.
Luckily, my wife Jean found letters from Jeff Spur, who's shown at the bottom right, and his brother, when we were writing the book. And Jeff sent us some diagrams, which are at the top of the page of the slide. And on the left is a diagram of a rocket, which is made with a syrup tin and a cocoa tin, which was a tight fit into the syrup tin. and in the syrup tin was put water and calcium carbide to make acetylene. The little hole at the top was so that you could light the gas mixture when it reached an explosive point. And Jeff had a lovely story that he and his brother Alan and Godfrey were experimenting with this in the back of Jeff's house. And there was a huge explosion, and the cocoa tin flew over the top of the house, landing in the street outside, just as his mother was returning home. And she was very shocked by this. On the right, there's a diagram of a submarine, which just relies on the gas being generated, not in exploding it. So you could probably do that with baking powder and vinegar. Godfrey wasn't satisfied with the small rocket, and at the bottom left, it shows that his second rocket used a tar barrel and a drinking trough on his father's farm, a metal drinking trough for the cattle. And this was really quite dangerous. It was 100 times more powerful, and it exploded before it took off, I think, completely flattening the trough, which did not amuse Godfrey's father. In 2012, Liz and I and Andrew Hounsfield and several other people took Jeff Spur to Magnus School, where a safer version of this rocket was recreated. The enthusiastic young teacher there used oxygen, which she and her pupils had made in the school laboratory, and town gas to make a safer version of this rocket. And it was great to take Jeff from his care home in Market Raisin. We had a lovely day out going there and going around the school where he and Godfrey had been educated.
As a teenager, Godfrey enjoyed holidays, camping and walking with his brothers and friends, often travelling on the back of his brother Paul's motorbike. Here you can see Godfrey holding the mudguard while his brother Paul is doing a handstand. His brothers Paul and Michael raced motorbikes around a field on the family farm, while Godfrey would fix them if they broke down. He was known for his ability not only to repair the motorbikes, but to make them go faster. His practical ability certainly showed from an early age. At the outbreak of World War II in 1939, Godfrey volunteered and joined the RAF. You can see him here in uniform on the right with his two brothers. When he joined the RAF, he was initially working in a salvage crew as part of a maintenance unit. While there, he taught himself and passed the radio exams, enabling him to move to work on radar. During the war, he had several bouts of illness, and on one occasion he was unwell, otherwise he might have been on a flight to retrieve a German Enigma machine. After the war, he attended a course at Faraday House. While a useful course, the maths at Faraday House was no more than school leaver level. He really learnt little there about maths or electronics. All his future work was self-taught, improvised, or intuitive. He joined EMI in 1949, initially working on radar based upon his experience in the RAF. A little later, he joined the Central Research Laboratories, where he subsequently moved to work on computers, doing a wide range of pioneering work in the field of computer technology, particularly on computer memory stores, and he stayed working in this field until EMI moved out of computers in 1967. 1967 was a challenging time for Godfrey. EMI had left mainframe computers in 1962 and then stopped their work on computer components in 1967. The question then was what to do with Godfrey. His project had ended, Central Research Laboratories, CRL, was shrinking. There was a group at EMI looking at pattern character recognition. So the head of CRL asked Godfrey to independently give some initial thoughts to this area. As the head of CRL later recalled, he was certain that Godfrey was bound to come up with something, but little did he think just how significant Godfrey's work would be. Like many things that Godfrey did, he thought in a different way and took a different approach to the idea of recognizing a pattern. Instead of just looking for a pattern on a plain page, a character, for example, he wondered if he could work out the contents of a volume object by taking a large number of readings through the object, and considered it as a series of slices through the object. From this, Godfrey moved to consider the object, the volume object, as the human body, and to consider imaging of the body, and particularly the head. He went on to create the lathe bed laboratory prototype. It is certain that Godfrey had a tremendous number of ideas, but he had very, very little money. Certainly, without his ingenuity, innovation, inspired thought and determination, and his ability to inspire others in his team, the laboratory prototype and the CT scanner would not have been achieved.
Godfrey preferred to work alone or in a team of 1 or 2 people, but he was a very sociable chap as well. And the photo on the right, which was taken by my brilliant colleague Dave King in his house in Chicago, shows us relaxing after some time working on whatever problem was in front of us at the time. On the left is Dave's wife Jackie and his son Matt. Then there's me. Then there's Matt Gollifer, who worked on the software, and finally Godfrey on the right. At the top left is a typical photo of Godfrey sat at his bench working on whatever he was experimenting on at the time, really focused on the job. And this would have been at a time when he could have delegated experiments to be done by someone else, but he wanted to do them himself. That's what he loved doing. That's how he understood the problems best. A little later on, the photo at the bottom left shows us working on the last scanner that Godfrey was involved in. He'd done the initial design of this in a fairly small team, and then kind of stepped back from running the project because he wanted to go on doing other things in small teams, and the project was managed from there on with a larger team that it needed by Stephen Bates, who's in the front row, second from the left.
Godfrey joined many social clubs, and he loved rambling. On the bottom we can see him enjoying a boat tug of war at an intervarsity club event. I've always wondered whether they actually won the tug of war. He enjoyed social trips abroad. There are many stories about his adventures abroad, from rewiring the electrics of a hotel room overnight to fixing a loo that flushed continuously. On the right is a picture of his trip to the Loire. How I would have loved to have been that lady being fed with grapes, or is it cherries, by Godfrey. Godfrey was certainly always popular with the ladies, but he never married, which I think he regretted. He did once comment to a colleague, "I could have married, you know," but I'm not sure that any lady would have coped with him, or whether he would have actually had the time for marriage. Some aspects of social outings did not always go as planned. He was well known for having problems on many occasions when out in his car, including getting stuck in a Ford as shown in this picture. He often either broke down or just ran out of petrol. I'm not actually sure whether he just forgot to fill up. His interests and ability extended to many other areas, including art. In this example here, he had painted 6 different versions of an original painting. Godfrey enjoyed music, playing jazz on the double bass as a teenager, and then in the RAF jazz band. You can see him in the top picture, playing the double bass on the right. He later taught himself to play the piano and played jazz with friends.
This is a lovely photo of Godfrey with his long-suffering assistant, Audrey. Godfrey's holding, this is when he was sort of notionally retiring, so he stopped being paid to work full-time but carried on working full-time after this for quite a few years. Godfrey's holding the kind of traditional retirement gift of a clock, but Audrey's holding something else, which is explained by the next slide. This cartoon was drawn by Tony Williams, who was in charge of all the mechanical design of the scanners produced by Godfrey from 1972 onwards, I think. At some stage in the middle 1970s, Godfrey was talking to Tony about how to test something, some idea or whatever. History doesn't recall exactly where this quote comes from, but Tony was thinking of doing the job properly with the mechanical design and carefully made stuff in the workshop. And Godfrey came up with a comment you can read at the bottom, that it's amazing what can be done with a hacksaw and a micrometer. And I think Tony thought this just summed up Godfrey's approach. And I think particularly it sums up what he had to do in the early days when he was trying to develop CT, but he had no money at all really to do it. So he had to improvise. And here's Tony's dream of what Godfrey's ideal scanner might have looked like as built by Godfrey.
Godfrey continued to work long into his retirement, including visiting the Brompton Hospital every Wednesday, working with David Firmin and the team on MRI. He continued to work long hours, often setting his alarm every 2 hours to reset an experiment throughout the night. Perhaps this is one of the reasons why he would have been impossible to marry or live with. Godfrey's way of thinking was different to most other people, and he would use different words and terms for things. In certain aspects of MRI, he worked in a different orientation to his colleagues, which gave them a challenge to understand what he meant at times. Throughout his career, working with Godfrey was always full of fun and a lot of laughter. He had a great sense of fun, even into later life, when at about 75 years old, he persuaded a friend to join him flying on a microlight. His friend commented that Godfrey was just like a schoolboy, full of curiosity and eagerness. Godfrey enjoyed people, but preferably people that he knew and wanted to be with. I remember well the 2002 British Institute of Radiology President's Conference, when my late partner Neil Ridyard and I drove Godfrey to and from Manchester for the conference. With Godfrey and Neil disagreeing, or was it just ardently discussing scientific issues, particularly relating to MRI, for most of the journey. I recall being stunned at the thought of someone vehemently arguing with a Nobel Prize winner. But Godfrey loved it. He loved to discuss and debate subjects, especially in areas that interested him. Godfrey won many awards, including the prestigious McRoberts Award and the Lasker Award in the USA for clinical medical research. In fact, in one 2-year period, he won over 24 major international awards. You can see Godfrey in the picture on the left, taking his mother to Buckingham Palace to receive his CBE, and in the centre with his brothers Paul and Michael at Buckingham Palace to receive his knighthood in 1981. Perhaps the most prestigious award was the Nobel Prize for Physiology and Medicine, which he won in 1979, sharing the award jointly with Alan Cormack.
Godfrey Hounsfield has been called the intuitive genius of CT, and that seems to fit the fact that he could often know the right answer to a puzzle in CT scanning before he was able to explain it to his colleagues in the conventional manner. But I wonder whether chess grandmaster of CT would be a more accurate way of describing how he worked. Often Godfrey seemed to know the answer to a puzzle in CT scanning before he knew how he'd reached the answer. And that's a bit similar to how a chess grandmaster has learnt chess and how they play chess. At a very early stage, the chess grandmaster will have learnt all of the rules of chess, and all of the grandmasters are exactly the same in their knowledge of the rules of chess. Where they differ is that they've also each studied a large number of past games of chess, maybe 10,000. That's a little bit like how the modern computers, which run artificial intelligence or AI software, it's a little bit like how that AI software works. And I wonder if Godfrey had taught himself how to think very quickly and accurately about science using the same methods as a chess grandmaster or a modern AI computer. He read very widely about science and engineering, and every time he passed anything that was of any mechanical or scientific or engineering interest, he always wanted to look at it and understand completely how it was working before he moved on. And it didn't matter whether he was walking alone or on an outing with friends. He just wanted to understand everything in the world that he could understand scientifically. And perhaps that's how he managed to work so much faster and more accurately than his contemporaries. But we can only guess.
Godfrey Hounsfield died on the 12th of August 2004. He was a mild-mannered person with a unique approach. Without his determination, innovation, and intuitive genius, we would not be celebrating the 50th anniversary of CT scanning. CT has revolutionized medical imaging and has had a profound effect on all aspects of medicine and surgery over the last 50 years. Thank you, Godfrey, and thank you all for joining Richard and myself for this part of the celebration of CT at 50.